Why did her hands always tremble when no one was looking? She gripped the crate, the steel biting into her palms, the sound of ammunition rattling inside like restless ghosts. Around her, sailors barked orders, boots clanged against the deck, jet engines thundered overhead. It was chaos, the kind of ordered chaos that made sense to everyone but her. She moved like clockwork, silent, unnoticed, another gear in the vast machine of war. That was how she wanted it. The less they saw her, the less they asked. But the sleeve betrayed her. As she shifted the box into place, the cuff slipped back. Sunlight caught the edge of something metallic, a glint sharp, defiant, impossible to ignore. Her breath hitched. She froze, almost dropped the load. Then, as quickly as she could, she tugged the sleeve down. Too late. From the far side of the deck, someone was watching. Admiral had been standing in silence, scanning his crew with the kind of patience only decades at sea could carve into a man. He watched discipline the way other men watched storms, fascinated, knowing one wrong rhythm could break everything apart. His gaze passed over dozens of sailors, but then it snagged on her. The girl no one seemed to notice, smaller than the others. Shoulders drawn inward, voice never raised. She carried weight like the rest, but as if each box carried something heavier than shells. He had seen that glint before, not in parades, not in speeches, in the field, in blood, in fire. The admiral's chest tightened. Carter kept moving, trying to fold herself into invisibility again. Just another set of hands, just another name in the manifest. But the medal on her wrist, the one she thought she'd hidden well enough, had betrayed her. And with it, all the years she had worked so hard to bury. She felt the change before she saw him, the way sailors stiffened, the whispers rippling like wind through tall grass. A shadow fell across the steel deck, long and heavy. She didn't have to turn to know who it was. The admiral rarely descended into the rhythm of labor. His presence was reserved for the moments that mattered, which meant right now she mattered. Her throat tightened. She adjusted the crate one more time, though it didn't need adjusting. Her hands were trembling. She hated that. Trembling betrayed the storm she always tried to smother. "Where did you get that?" The voice was quiet, firm. It cut through the roar of turbines and shouts. It carried not as an order but as a demand for truth. She turned her head slightly, enough to see the sharp eyes studying her, enough to know that silence wouldn't save her. For a heartbeat the deck went still. Boots halted. Engines seemed to fade into the background. 100 men and women went on breathing, but it was her heartbeat that she heard loudest. And in that space she had a choice. Lie, say it wasn't hers, say she found it, say it meant nothing. Or tell the story she had sworn never to tell again. Her lips parted. No sound came out, not yet. She closed them, swallowed hard, her chest rose, fell. The air was thick, pressing down. Her mind dragged her backward, not to the safety of the carrier, but to the night the medal had been born. The village smothered in smoke. The sharp snap of rifles in the dark. The cries of men who would never see morning. Her hands dragging one, then another, across mud slick with blood. The blast, the fire, the silence after. No one here needed to know that story. They had their own burdens, their own ghosts. What good would it do to pour hers onto the deck? What good would it do to speak when silence had protected her for so long? But silence never truly protects, it only delays. Her sleeve still shimmered faintly in the light. Too many eyes had seen. Too many whispers were already forming. The truth was out, whether she gave it voice or not. So she exhaled, soft, almost fragile, then she spoke. "It's not something I show," she said, her words barely carrying. Yet every sailor seemed to lean closer. "It wasn't given, it was earned, and I never wanted it." The admiral's gaze stayed steady, unblinking. He wasn't asking for ceremony. He wasn't asking for her to justify herself. He wanted her story, the real one. Her knuckles whitened as she gripped the edge of the crate. Her chest ached. She could stop now. She could bury the words before they left her, but she remembered the men she had dragged through fire, the faces that still visited her dreams. If she buried the story, she buried them again. and she couldn't do that, not twice. She lifted her eyes at last, though it burned to feel the weight of every gaze. We were ambushed. They hit us harder than we expected. My unit, she stopped. Her voice caught. She swallowed again. Most didn't make it past the first hour. Silence, just the wind sweeping across the carrier, the distant shriek of a jet taking off. She continued. The wounded were trapped. We couldn't hold the line. They told me to fall back, but I couldn't leave them. I dragged them out. One by one, through smoke, through fire, through. Her voice faltered again. Her hand instinctively pressed against her ribs, against the scar she always hid beneath fabric. Through everything. No one moved. No one spoke. The deck had become a stage, and yet she wasn't performing. She was bleeding in words. She closed her eyes. The images wouldn't let go. The flash, the blast, the ringing in her ears, her body thrown against stone, the weight of another soldier across her chest, his blood soaking her uniform. She remembered gasping for air, tasting iron, not knowing if she would stand again. When it was over, she whispered, they tried to pin this on me. They wanted a ceremony, a speech, applause, but medals don't bring back the fallen. Medals don't stop the nightmares, so I refused. I walked away. I thought if I kept it hidden, I could bury the memory with it. Her sleeve slid back again. This time she didn't pull it down. She let the medal shine. The admiral's eyes softened. For the first time his hand moved. He removed his cap, slowly, deliberately, holding it against his chest, a sign no order could compel. For a moment didn't understand. She blinked. Her breath trembled. Then one by one sailors followed. Caps came off. Helmets tucked against ribs. Heads bowed not in pity but in respect. The deck that had been filled with noise only moments ago now held a silence so profound. It seemed to carry across the endless ocean. She stood frozen in it. Her body stiff, but her heart cracked open in ways she hadn't allowed for years. The ache inside loosened just slightly. She had never wanted glory, only remembrance. And now, standing among those who finally saw her, she understood something. Hiding her story had never protected her. It had only kept others from knowing what sacrifice truly meant. The admiral's voice returned, low but steady enough to carry. Courage doesn't hide, he said. It lives. She couldn't stop the tears this time. They blurred the deck, the faces, the sea. But for the first time the tears weren't of shame. They were of release, of weight set down, of ghosts finally spoken into the world, no longer hers alone to carry. Applause followed, not wild, not celebratory, slow, steady, each clap a vow that her story wouldn't vanish into the waves, that those she carried with her would not be forgotten. Bowed her head. The metal gleamed openly now, kissed by sunlight, and in that gleam she realized something she had never dared to believe. Kindness doesn't vanish, it waits, it finds its way back. And sometimes dignity doesn't speak, it simply acts. The carrier roared back to life around her, but she no longer felt invisible. She no longer wanted to be. Because silence had finally found its voice. What happens to a soldier when the gunfire stops, but the echoes never leave? Carter lay awake most nights, staring at the ceiling above her bunk, listening to the ocean hum against steel. She didn't sleep so much as drift, caught between memory and reality. When she closed her eyes, it wasn't darkness that met her. It was smoke, shouts, the metallic taste of blood on the back of her tongue. That night, the one she had just spoken of on the deck, it had never truly ended for her. She remembered the mission with a clarity that sometimes felt like punishment. A small village, mountains on 3 sides, the kind of place where farmers tended fields that had survived more wars than anyone could count. Their unit had been sent to secure it, to hold the line against forces pressing north. It was supposed to be simple: secure, contain, hold. But nothing is simple in war. The first shots cracked before dawn. Remembered the way the air itself seemed to shatter. Bullets splintered walls, tore through the thin wood of doors. Screams rose from the villagers, half warning, half terror. The squad scrambled into defense positions, but the enemy came like a flood, relentless, coordinated, as though they had been waiting for them to arrive. Was 24 then. Young but not, she had already learned that survival belonged to those who refused to stop moving. So she moved, dragging sandbags, firing short bursts, dragging the wounded to cover. She didn't think. Thinking was for later, for after. But later never came. Her squad leader went down in the first wave, a shot to the chest. Two others fell in the smoke, their bodies crumpling before she even saw where the fire came from. By the time the second hour hit, half her unit was gone. The rest were pinned, bleeding, desperate. "Fall back," someone screamed. But fall back to where? Behind them lay only the village, houses already burning, civilians crouching in basements that wouldn't survive a direct hit. Retreat meant leaving them to ash. Retreat meant abandoning the wounded men lying in the dirt, calling out names with voices that were breaking. She had a choice, the kind no one trains you for. Her chest heaved with fear. She had felt it gnawing at her ribs like a wild animal, but louder than fear was something else. A refusal. She couldn't walk away, not while they still had breath. So she moved. Remembered her body acting faster than her mind. She dashed into open fire, dragging Corporal Lewis by his harness across 20 meters of mud, bullets snapping the air around her. She threw him behind cover, then went back. Sergeant Hale next. Then Private. One by one she hauled them out. Each trip was slower, heavier. Smoke burned her lungs. Her ears rang with explosions. Shrapnel tore across her side, but she kept going. The blast came when she was on her knees, trying to pull another man free from the rubble of a collapsed wall. She had barely looked up when the world turned white. The sound was thunder. The heat was a furnace. For a second, she was certain she had died. But death didn't take her, not then. She woke to silence, her body half buried in dust and stone, her ears screaming with nothing but ringing. She couldn't move her legs at first, couldn't breathe. Then slowly the pain brought her back. Pain meant she was alive. Pain meant she wasn't finished. The soldier she had tried to save was gone. She didn't let herself look too long. She pushed the grief down where the rest of it lived. And she crawled back toward the voices. Crawled until her hands found another body, and another, until she could drag them into what little shelter was left. By the time reinforcements broke through, the village was gone. Black smoke curled into the morning sky. Was on her knees, bleeding, surrounded by the men she had saved and the ones she hadn't. They called it bravery later. They called it heroism. They tried to pin a medal on her chest. But all she remembered was the weight of bodies she couldn't lift, the sound of voices that faded into silence before help arrived. She refused the stage, refused the speeches. She walked away from the applause, because how could she stand tall when so many lay in the ground? And so she carried the medal in silence, hidden like a scar, not a symbol of pride but of everything she couldn't undo. On the carrier now, years later, would still wake in the night to the sound of that blast. She would press her hand to her ribs, feeling the scar beneath her skin, a reminder carved by fire. She didn't speak of it. She never had. But the admiral's eyes had pulled it out of her, dragged the story into light. And now she wondered if she had made a mistake. Would they see her differently? Would whispers turn from respect to pity? Would she become the ghost of her own reputation, defined by one night instead of everything she had chosen since? She sat alone on the edge of her bunk, staring at her hands. They looked steady now, but she remembered the trembling that always betrayed her when she tried to forget. The door creaked. A shadow stepped inside. She looked up, expecting another sailor, maybe someone curious enough to press her for details. But it was the admiral. He didn't speak at first, just stood in the doorway, hat tucked beneath his arm. His silence wasn't heavy, it was measured, respectful. "I read the report from that night," he said finally. His voice was softer here, stripped of command. "But reports don't tell the truth, not all of it." lowered her gaze. Reports are enough. No, he stepped closer. They're paper, numbers, lists of casualties. They don't carry the weight you do. She said nothing. She couldn't. Her throat was tight again. The admiral studied her for a moment longer, then pulled something from his pocket. A folded piece of paper, yellowed at the edges, creased 100 times. He held it out. She didn't take it. "I've kept this for years," he said. "A letter from a soldier I lost. He was 19, wrote home every week. His last letter never made it." His heart twisted. "I read it sometimes," the admiral continued. "Not because I want to remember the pain, but because it reminds me of the cost, the real cost. It reminds me that men and women don't fight for medals. They fight for each other. They fight to keep someone else alive, even when it tears them apart." He placed the letter on the edge of her bunk. "You understand that better than most," he said. She stared at the folded paper, unable to move. "I didn't mean to expose you on deck," he added. "But some truths shouldn't stay buried, not because you need recognition, but because others need to see it's possible, to see that courage is not the absence of pain. It's the willingness to carry it and still move forward." Her eyes burned. She blinked fast, refusing to let the tears fall this time. The admiral straightened. He tucked his hat back under his arm. "We'll be wheels up in an hour. Rest while you can." Then he left. Sat frozen, the letter lying like a stone beside her. Slowly she reached for it. Her fingers brushed the worn paper. She didn't open it. Not yet. But she held it in her lap, feeling its weight. Another man's words. Another life cut short. Another reminder she wasn't alone in the burden she carried. Her breath shook. Her chest tightened. But for the first time in years, she felt something else inside the ache. Not relief, not yet. But the faintest spark of hope. Because maybe, just maybe, her silence hadn't been a shield. Maybe it had been a prison. And now, the walls were beginning to crack. What happens when the very past you've tried to bury calls you back into its fire? Stood on the deck at dawn, the sea burning orange beneath the rising sun. The carrier thrummed with preparation. Sailors rushed across the steel expanse. Aircraft hissed and growled as mechanics checked their engines, and the air was thick with urgency. She should have felt invisible again, tucked away in the machinery. That was her place. Silent, unseen, part of the endless rhythm of labor. But after the admiral's quiet conversation the night before, invisibility had vanished. People looked at her differently now. Some with respect, some with questions, some with the wary curiosity that comes from discovering someone is more than you thought. She hated it. She needed the shadows. But shadows don't always protect you. Sometimes they only point toward the light. She felt the weight of the metal under her sleeve, the metal cool against her skin. She had thought about discarding it countless times, throwing it into the sea, burying it where no one could ever find it. But each time she tried, she saw faces. Lewis, Hale, all the men she dragged through smoke, all the ones she couldn't save. Throwing it away would have been throwing them away too, so she kept it. A secret reminder, a scar in silver. Now the admiral knew, and the crew knew, and she couldn't erase that. "Carter." Her name snapped like a whip. She turned. A lieutenant strode toward her, clipboard under one arm, headset crooked on his neck. His stride was sharp, efficient, every step carrying the weight of urgency. "Yes, sir." "You're reassigned." Her stomach tightened. Reassigned. He shoved the clipboard toward her, pages filled with lines of names, assignments, coordinates. "We're moving out on a reconnaissance op. Intel is thin. The admiral wants an experienced set of eyes on the team. You're it." Her throat went dry. She stared at the page, at the inked letters of her own name. Reconnaissance. Not labor, not crates, not the shadows she had chosen. The battlefield again. "There must be a mistake," she said, voice tight. "I'm not." The lieutenant cut her off. "The admiral doesn't make mistakes." Her breath caught. She wanted to argue, to insist she didn't belong there, that she wasn't who they thought she was anymore. but the look in his eyes told her there was no space for refusal. Orders were orders. She nodded slowly, understood. When the lieutenant walked away, she stayed rooted to the spot. Her pulse pounded in her ears. She hadn't stepped into combat since that night. Years of avoiding missions, taking posts no one else wanted, burying herself in silence. And now they were dragging her back. She pressed her palms against the cold rail of the carrier, staring out at the horizon. It looked calm, endless, deceptively peaceful. But beyond it, somewhere, waited the same fire that had her once before. Why her? She knew the answer. The admiral. He had seen the truth, and he had chosen not to let her hide behind it anymore. Clenched her jaw. She wanted to hate him for it. But beneath the anger was something more dangerous, something like gratitude. 2 hours later, she sat in the belly of a helicopter, strapped in beside men she barely knew. The engines roared, blades slicing the air above them. Dust and salt whipped across the deck as the bird lifted, carrying them into the pale sky. The men around her spoke in low voices, checking gear, muttering jokes that tried to mask their nerves. Sat silent, hands folded in her lap, eyes fixed ahead. She felt their glances, the sideways looks they thought she didn't notice. They knew her story now, at least enough of it to wonder. One of them, a corporal with a scar running across his cheek, finally broke the silence. That story on deck, was it true? Didn't look at him. Which part? The part about dragging your whole squad out, alone. Her jaw tightened. She could feel the others listening, waiting. She exhaled slowly. Not the whole squad, not all of them made it. The corporal nodded, quiet. No one pressed further. The weight of her words settled over them like a shadow. The mission brief was simple on paper. A village near the border. Satellite images showed unusual movement, vehicles, supply caches, possible staging for something larger. The job was to confirm. In and out. Eyes only. But knew better. Missions were never simple, not when villages were involved. The helicopter touched down on the edge of scrubland, dust curling into the air. The team disembarked quickly, moving with practiced rhythm. Followed, rifle in hand, every step of the terrain pulling memories to the surface. Burnt fields, collapsed walls, the acrid smell of fire that lingered even in places untouched by it. They moved fast, silent, the way training taught them. Senses sharpened with each step, her mind snapping back into patterns she thought she'd buried. Scan the ridges, count the seconds between heartbeats, listen for the wrong kind of silence. And there it was. The silence. Too deep, too still. A village should carry life, dogs barking, tools clattering, children laughing, even if faint. But here there was nothing, only the wind dragging across sand. "Something's wrong," she whispered. The corporal glanced at her. "How do you know?" She didn't answer. She just raised her hand, signaling a halt. The team crouched low, rifles up. They waited, breaths shallow. And then movement. Shadows at the edge of the village. Too quick, too coordinated. The trap sprung before the first shot fired. Gunfire ripped through the still air, echoing against the hills. The team dove for cover, rounds slamming into stone and dirt around them. His body moved without thought, muscle memory born of nights like this. She pressed against a wall, peering around the corner, eyes scanning the angles. She saw them, fighters slipping between buildings, rifles flashing in bursts. They knew the terrain. They knew the team was coming. The lieutenant cursed into his comms. "We're compromised. Repeat, compromised." His pulse thundered. She could feel the old fear, the same gnawing beast she thought she had tamed years ago. But this time, she didn't have the luxury of silence. Men's lives depended on her voice. "Left flank," she shouted. "They're circling us." The soldiers shifted at once, trusting her call. Fire ripped into the shadows, breaking the enemy's push. Moved again, sliding behind rubble, scanning rooftops. The air stank of cordite, dust choking her lungs. She felt alive in the worst way, the way only battle could make you feel. Every nerve electric. Every second stretched thin between life and death. But with the fire came the memories. The night of the ambush clawed at her mind, every explosion pulling her backward. She tasted ash. She saw the faces again, and she froze. A figure appeared in her, rifle raised. His breath caught. She couldn't move, couldn't lift her own weapon. For one split second she was 24 again, buried under rubble, the blast screaming in her ears. The shot rang out. But it wasn't hers. The corporal fired from behind her, dropping the figure where he stood. He looked at her, eyes sharp. "You good?" Blinked hard, forcing herself back into the present. Her grip tightened on the rifle. "I'm fine." But she was not yet. The firefight stretched on, a blur of sound and smoke. When it ended, the enemy had melted back into the hills, leaving silence behind once more. The team regrouped, hearts pounding, breaths ragged. No casualties, not this time. The lieutenant scanned them, jaw tight. They knew we were coming. Someone leaked this op. No one spoke. The words hung heavy in the air. Wiped sweat and dust from her brow, her chest heaving. She looked at the village, hollow, empty, a shell. Another place swallowed by fire, left for ghosts. And in her chest, the old question returned. How many times could you survive the same nightmare before it broke you completely? How do you lead men when your own ghosts drag you backward? Sat in silence inside the transport on the ride back to the carrier. The helicopter thudded against the wind, its cabin filled with the low hum of engines and the heavier hum of men trying not to think about what had just happened. Sweat streaked with dust clung to their faces. Rifles still smelled of burnt powder, and no one spoke. She kept her eyes on the floor, on the scuffed metal beneath her boots, but her mind replayed the moment, the shadow in her sights, her finger frozen on the trigger, the rush of memory drowning her in fire and smoke, and the corporal's shot saving her before she even blinked. Shame coiled inside her like a blade. She had always believed silence was her punishment, but now she feared it was cowardice. When the helicopter thudded onto the carrier, the men disembarked quickly, their faces tight with anger they hadn't voiced yet, lagged behind. The corporal, the same one who had fired the saving shot, paused beside her. He didn't say much, just one quiet line. "You saw him, you should fired." Then he walked off. Her chest ached, he was right. She lay awake that night, again staring at the ceiling above her bunk. The ship groaned and shivered with the pulse of engines. Every sound reminded her of movement, of life, of people who expected her to carry her weight. She pressed her hand against her ribs, feeling the scar beneath. It felt heavier tonight. By dawn she was summoned. The admiral's quarters were quiet, the air thick with the smell of salt carried in on his uniform. He stood near the window, hat tucked under his arm, gaze locked on the horizon. Saluted, her hand trembled slightly. She hoped he didn't notice. "At ease," he said. His voice was steady, calm, but it carried the weight of oceans. She lowered her hand, waited. "I've read the reports," he said finally. "Your team says you called the flank. That call saved them." She swallowed hard. "I froze, sir." He turned, eyes sharp. "You acted before you froze, don't forget that." Looked down. She wanted to argue, but his gaze didn't allow it. He studied her for a moment longer. Then, "Do you know why I sent you?" She shook her head. "Because of the medal." "No," his voice cut like steel. "Not the medal, what it meant. You saw the battlefield once for what it truly is. Not glory, not pride. You saw the cost. That makes you dangerous to the enemy, and necessary to your own." Her throat tightened. "Necessary." He nodded once. "They need someone who remembers what loss feels like. Someone who won't treat lives like numbers on a page." She almost laughed, bitter, sharp. "Sir, I'm no leader. I can't even keep my hand steady." The admiral's jaw flexed. He stepped closer, lowering his voice. "You're wrong. Leadership isn't steadiness, it's weight, and you've carried more than most." She said nothing, couldn't. His words dug too deep. Finally, he turned back to the window. There's something else. That ambush yesterday, it wasn't random. Someone fed your location. Someone wanted you pinned down. Paul spiked. You think there's a leak? I know there is. He glanced back at her. And I need someone I can trust to see what others won't. Someone who knows what it feels like to be on the wrong end of betrayal. Her breath caught. Betrayal. The word cut deeper than he knew. Years ago in that burning village, part of her had always suspected the enemy knew their position too well, too fast, too precise. She had buried the thought, afraid of what it might mean. But now the same shadows stirred. I can't ask you to do this, the admiral said, softer now. But I will, because I don't think you'll turn away. She clenched her fists at her sides. The metal pressed cold against her wrist. She hated that he was right. She hated more that part of her wanted to answer. When she left his quarters, the corridor felt narrower than before, the air heavier. She walked back toward the barracks, her boots echoing against steel, her chest tight with a decision she hadn't spoken but already felt forming. In the mess hall, she found the team. They sat in a cluster, heads bent, whispers sharp. She could hear fragments. Knew we were coming. Somebody fed them. If command doesn't figure it out, we're next. Their eyes flicked up as she entered. Silence spread like oil on water. Moved past them, collected a tray, sat alone. She didn't blame them. She was the outsider, the ghost, the one who froze. But she also saw their fear, the way their eyes darted, searching for someone to anchor them. The corporal broke the silence first. If there's a leak, we can't trust anyone. Another soldier muttered, then what the hell are we supposed to do? Lifted her gaze, meeting their eyes for the first time since the mission. Her voice was quiet, but it carried. You don't survive by trusting no one. You survive by knowing who you'd bleed for. The words surprised even her. They seemed to silence the air around the table. For a long moment no one replied. Then the corporal gave a small nod, almost imperceptible, but it was something. Later, in the solitude of the armory, cleaned her rifle. Each motion was deliberate, ritualistic, but her mind wasn't on the weapon. It was on the admiral's words, on the possibility of betrayal, on the question that gnawed at her. If someone inside had betrayed them once, would they do it again? And if so, what would she do when she found them? Her reflection glinted faintly in the steel of the rifle's barrel. The scar across her ribs throbbed. The metal pressed against her wrist. The past whispered louder than ever. And she realized the truth. You can't run from ghosts, not forever. Because sooner or later, the living need you more than the dead. What happens when no one trusts each other? But survival demands they move as one. The briefing room was thick with tension. Maps stretched across the table, coordinates marked in red, lines drawn like veins across unfamiliar terrain. The team sat scattered around it, their faces tight with fatigue and suspicion. Stood against the wall, arms folded, silent as the officers droned through the plan. But no one was listening, not really. They were listening to each other, watching each other. Every cough, every glance, every shift of weight carried the unspoken question, who leaked us last time? The lieutenant cleared his throat. We'll move in under cover of night. Same insertion point, different target. Intel says supply convoys are moving through this pass. We need confirmation and, if possible, disruption. No one spoke. Not until the corporal leaned back in his chair, scar cutting deeper in the dim light. What if Intel's wrong again? He asked, his tone flat. The lieutenant's jaw twitched. It won't be. Felt the question hang heavy. She saw the others' eyes darting, some toward the lieutenant, some toward her. She clenched her fists against her sides. She knew what they were thinking. She had been the new variable, the one pulled from shadows and shoved into their ranks. Enough, the lieutenant snapped. We move at 2300, gear up. Chairs scraped, boots echoed. The men filed out, some with muttered curses under their breath, lingered. The map's lines seemed to pulse beneath the harsh light. Convoys, passes. Another operation built on trust no one had. She pressed her palm against the table, staring at the ink until her vision blurred. She didn't realize the admiral was there until his reflection appeared in the glass pane of the briefing room. "You heard them," he said quietly. She straightened. "They don't trust me." "They don't trust anyone," he corrected. Her voice was tight. "How do you fight alongside men who are waiting for you to fail?" The admiral's eyes didn't waver. "You don't wait, you lead, and when you act, you leave them no choice but to follow." Her chest ached. She wanted to argue. She wanted to insist she wasn't that person. But the truth was they wouldn't survive without someone stepping forward, and none of them seemed ready. The operation began under moonless sky. The helicopter cut low across the hills, blades muffled, lights dimmed. The soldiers moved in silence, faces hidden beneath night vision glow. Sat wedged between them, rifle cradled in her lap, heart pounding like a drum she couldn't quiet. They landed in darkness, the ground dry and cracked beneath their boots. The convoy route lay ahead, a narrow pass flanked by jagged stone. They moved carefully, every step a whisper against earth. For an hour nothing stirred but the wind. Scanned the ridges, every shadow a threat. Her body moved with old instincts, but her mind was screaming. What if it's another trap? What if we're walking into it again? The corporal muttered through the comms, "Something off, too quiet." His breath tightened. He was right, this wasn't the stillness of emptiness, this was waiting. She crouched lower, her eyes darting to the rocks above. Then she saw it faint, almost invisible, the shimmer of a scope catching starlight. "Sniper," she hissed. The first shot cracked a second later, sparks erupting off stone. The team scattered, diving for cover as the valley lit up in bursts of gunfire. Muzzle flashes sparked from the ridges, enemy silhouettes moving fast and precise. It was an ambush, again. The lieutenant shouted into his comms, panic sharp in his voice. "We're pinned, we need support." But support wouldn't come fast enough. Not out here, not tonight. Pressed her back against stone, pulse hammering. Her hands shook, but not like before. Not frozen. Not paralyzed. This time the fear ignited something sharper. She scanned the chaos, the disoriented flinch of her team as they fired blindly into the hills. They were breaking. Her voice ripped out before she thought. Suppressing fire, right ridge now. The men reacted instantly, guns roaring as they poured fire toward the direction she pointed. The enemy ducked low, their barrage faltering. Dashed out, sliding behind another rock, her eyes locking on a cluster of movement above. "Left flank, push forward," she barked, her tone cutting through the chaos like a blade. The corporal glanced at her, and then obeyed, motioning two men to follow. They surged left, rifles spitting fire, forcing the attackers back a step. The lieutenant tried to shout over her, voice cracking, "Hold position." But no one was listening. They were listening to her. His body moved like it had years ago, but this time there was no freeze. Her lungs burned, her legs ached, but the fear didn't own her. She pushed it down, let it sharpen her instead. Her calls came rapid, precise, angles, positions, timing. The team shifted with her voice, their chaos tightening into rhythm. Minutes stretched like hours. Bullets tore stone to shards. The smell of gunpowder coated her tongue. But slowly, painfully, the tide shifted. The enemy fire thinned, their movements faltered until shadows slipped back into the night. Silence fell, broken only by the hiss of wind through stone. The team panted, rifles still raised, sweat dripping into dust. No casualties, not one. Crouched, her chest heaving. Her hands trembled as the adrenaline faded. She glanced at the men. They were looking at her differently now. Not with suspicion, not with disdain, but with something heavier, something closer to belief. The corporal broke the silence. "If you hadn't called it," he trailed off, shaking his head, "we'd all be dead." The lieutenant's face was pale, his authority shredded by panic. He said nothing. The men followed back through the valley. Step by step, their formation tightened around her, not because she asked, not because she demanded, but because they chose to. Back on the carrier, the whispers began before their boots even cooled. Carter, the one who froze, the one who hid her metal, had pulled an entire team out of another ambush alive. She sat alone again that night, staring at her reflection in the small mirror above her bunk. The scar across her ribs ached. The metal gleamed faintly under the light. She hated both. But tonight, for the first time, she didn't feel like they were weights meant only to bury her. She felt something stranger, something she didn't dare name. Because leading wasn't what she wanted. It never had been. But tonight, it was what she had done. And part of her, the part that still remembered dragging men through fire years ago, feared that once you led once, you could never truly step back into silence again. What does it mean to lead men who might be hiding knives behind their backs? The carrier groaned in the night, steel bones humming against the ocean's restless tide. Sat awake, boots planted on the cold floor of her quarters, rifle across her lap. She cleaned it slowly, motion deliberate, though her hands trembled just enough to betray her thoughts. She should have been exhausted. Every muscle screamed from the ambush, every nerve stretched taut from the weight of commands she never wanted to give. Yet sleep refused to touch her, not after what she had seen in the valley. The ambush hadn't been chance. Twice was no accident. Someone knew their routes, their plans, their positions, and the enemy was waiting. Her mind chased names, faces, who could have leaked it. The lieutenant with his panic too sharp to mask. The corporal whose scar spoke of survival but whose silence now carried weight she couldn't read. Or someone higher, someone feeding them intel dressed as truth. The rifle gleamed under the dim light. She caught her reflection in its barrel. Her eyes looked older than she remembered, worn, haunted, like she had never left that burning village years ago. A soft knock broke the silence. She froze. Carter, the corporal's voice. She set the rifle aside and opened the door. He stood there, helmet under one arm, fatigue jacket unzipped, sweat still clinging to his shirt from drills. His eyes were sharp but not hostile. "Couldn't sleep either?" she asked. He gave a humorless laugh. "After tonight, no chance." She stepped back, motioning him inside. He leaned against the wall, arms folded, studying her. The silence stretched. Finally, he spoke. "You're not what I expected." She raised an eyebrow. "And what did you expect?" "Someone broken, someone hiding." He tilted his head. "But out there, you were steady, you pulled us through." Her chest tightened. "I froze before that, you saw it." He shrugged. "You moved when it counted." She wanted to believe him. She wanted to let the words patch the cracks inside her. But she couldn't. Not when the truth of her hesitation still echoed in her chest. The corporal's gaze darkened. "You think this was another setup?" Her throat tightened. "Yes." He nodded once as though he'd expected it. "Me too." Their eyes met. For a moment, no words were needed. They both knew the truth. Someone among them wasn't who they claimed to be. But which one? The corporal straightened. "If we're going to make it through, we'll need to trust someone." Exhaled slowly. "Trust is dangerous." "So is fighting blind," he countered. She looked at him, searching his face for cracks, for lies, for betrayal. But all she saw was the same exhaustion mirrored back at her, the same scars hidden behind silence. When he left, she sat back on her bunk, heart heavier. Trust was a currency she hadn't carried in years, and now she was being asked to spend it. The next morning, the team trained on deck. The air was sharp with salt, the sky blindingly clear. Moved through the drills with the others, every motion a reminder of muscles long out of practice. The lieutenant barked orders, trying to reassert control, but his voice carried less weight now. The men listened, but their eyes flicked to her. She hated it. She hated the way they waited for her nod, her glance, her approval. She didn't want the role the admiral had forced into her hands. She wasn't meant to lead. She was meant to survive. but survival alone didn't seem to be an option anymore. Later, she found herself in the admiral's quarters again. He studied her from behind his desk, the letter still folded neatly beside him, untouched since the night he had given it to her. "You've earned their ears," he said. "I didn't ask for them," she snapped before she could stop herself. His expression didn't change. Leadership isn't about asking, it's about answering when no one else can. Her hands curled into fists. "What if I fail them? What if I freeze again?" "Then you'll move anyway," he said calmly, "because that's what you've always done." Her voice dropped, almost breaking. "I didn't save everyone. No one does." The words cut sharp, but they didn't bleed. They steadied. He leaned forward. "You think your scars make you weak. They don't. They make you honest, and men will follow honesty before they follow bravado." She turned away, blinking hard against the sting in her eyes. She hated how his words dug into places she tried to bury. That night the alarm sounded. Not drills, not routine, real. The team scrambled, boots pounding against steel, weapons in hand. Rushed with them, heart hammering. On the horizon, faint plumes of smoke marked movement, too coordinated, too close. Another convoy, another trap. The lieutenant shouted orders, his voice already cracking with panic. The men faltered, uncertain. Their eyes darted toward her, always toward her. Clenched her jaw, forcing the fear down. The scar at her ribs ached, the metal pressed cold against her wrist. The past screamed inside her, but she moved. "Form perimeter," she barked. "North and west coverage, no blind spots." The soldiers obeyed instantly, shifting with purpose, their chaos folding into rhythm. She felt the old weight settle on her shoulders again, the weight of men trusting her voice more than their own fear. Gunfire cracked from the ridge. Shadows moved against the glow of fire. The ambush was real, again. And this time, knew it wouldn't stop until she uncovered the traitor bleeding their movements into enemy hands. But that meant one truth she couldn't ignore. It wasn't just the enemy she was fighting. It was one of her own. What if the enemy wasn't only out there in the hills, but sitting beside you in the dark? The firefight dragged on through the night, every crack of gunfire echoing across the ridges, sparks leaping from stone like fireflies. Shouted orders without pause, her voice cutting through the chaos, forcing rhythm into the storm. The men moved as one, their panic channeled into precision, but only because she told them where to stand. And yet, every time she glanced across the line, a single thought hammered at her skull. One of them told the enemy we'd be here. She ducked behind a slab of rock, chest heaving, dust coating her throat. The corporal slid in beside her, reloading, his face grim in the faint light. "They knew everything," he growled. "Our route, our timing, even the fallback point." Her stomach twisted, which means someone's still feeding them. His eyes searched hers. "Then we've got a choice, keep fighting blind or figure out who it is." She looked away, the words pressing heavy against her chest. She had been trained to face gunfire, explosions, even death. But betrayal, that was a wound that never healed. The gunfire slowed, tapering into silence. The ridges went still, shadows melting back into the hills. The enemy had pulled away again, not defeated, not broken, just watching, waiting. The lieutenant called the ceasefire. His voice shook as he ordered the team to regroup. Caught the way the men looked at him now, not with obedience but with doubt. Their eyes drifted back to her, silent questions pressing against her skin. She hated it. She hadn't asked for this weight, but she bore it anyway. Back on the carrier, the tension only grew heavier. In the mess hall, whispers buzzed like insects. Some glanced at the lieutenant, suspicion sharp. Others at curiosity flickering in their eyes. The air itself seemed toxic, poisoned by the thought that any one of them could be the reason they'd walked into fire twice. The corporal slid onto the bench across from her. His voice was low, barely audible above the din. "We can't ignore it. Someone's passing intel." Spoon hovered above her tray. She lowered it, jaw tight. "You're sure it's not just bad intel from above?" He shook his head. "Too precise. They knew exactly where we'd be, twice. That doesn't happen by chance." Her chest ached. She didn't want to believe it. She didn't want to look into the eyes of men who had bled beside her and wonder who among them would sell the rest for nothing but silence and silver. But denial was dangerous. Denial got men killed. That night she found herself alone on deck. The ocean stretched black and endless, the stars indifferent above. She pressed her hand against her ribs, the scar burning as if it remembered every time she had trusted and been betrayed. The admiral's voice broke the silence. "You feel it too." She turned. He stood there, cap tucked under his arm, the salt wind pulling at his uniform. Her voice was quiet. "They're falling apart. They don't know who to follow." "They already chose," he said. His gaze held her steady. "The question is whether you'll accept it." Her throat tightened. "I didn't ask for this." "No soldier ever does," he said softly. "Leadership isn't a gift. It's a debt, one you pay with every step you take while others falter." She looked away, eyes stinging. "And if I fail them?" "Then you fail and you get back up. That's all any of us can do." His words dug deep, but deeper still was the shadow of betrayal hanging over them. She hesitated. "Then, if there's a traitor?" "There is," the admiral said firmly. "And when you find them, you'll know, because betrayal always leaves a scar you can't hide." The next mission came sooner than anyone expected. A dawn raid. Intel claimed the enemy was stockpiling weapons in a nearby canyon. The team prepped in silence, every motion mechanical, every glance edged with suspicion. Could feel it, the weight of mistrust pressing against them like an invisible enemy. As they loaded into the helicopter, she caught the lieutenant's eyes. His hand trembled slightly as he clipped his gear. She looked away quickly. Was it fear or guilt? The ride was tense, the air thick with unspoken accusations. No one joked. No one muttered. They just sat, the blades hammering overhead, each man locked in his own prison of doubt. When they touched down, the canyon loomed around them, sheer walls cutting off the sky. Skin prickled. This was too perfect, too contained, a trap waiting to spring. Her hand tightened on her rifle. Her voice was low but sharp. "We move careful, no open ground." The men obeyed. They always did now. They slipped into the canyon's shadow, rifles sweeping, boots crunching against stone. For minutes there was nothing. Then movement. Figures in the distance, shapes darting between boulders. Gunfire erupted. The team scattered, taking cover behind rocks as the canyon lit with muzzle flashes. Fired, her body moving with instinct, her voice barking orders before thought could catch up. But even as she fought, her eyes kept flicking to her men, watching, measuring, waiting for the crack that would give one of them away. Then it happened. In the chaos, caught it, a figure breaking formation, sliding too far from cover, moving in a line that exposed their flank. It wasn't clumsy. It was deliberate. She saw the signal, a quick flick of a hand toward the ridge, a signal no one else noticed. Her stomach dropped. Her rifle snapped up. But her finger froze on the trigger, her chest tightening. What if she was wrong? What if her fear painted shadows where none existed? The corporal's shout tore through the air. "Carter, call it." Her breath caught, every eye snapped to her. In that heartbeat, she wasn't just fighting the enemy, she was fighting herself. She had to decide. Trust or kill? How do you know when the silence you've carried becomes more dangerous than the truth? The canyon burned with noise, rifles cracking, stone shattering, echoes bouncing from wall to wall. His breath tore in her chest, sweat running cold down her back. Her rifle was steady, her eyes locked on the figure who had just betrayed them with a flick of the hand. The lieutenant. Her gut clenched. She wanted to deny it, wanted to believe his panic, his trembling was weakness, not treachery, but she'd seen it. That signal, quick, deliberate. The ridge answered in fire only seconds later. "Carter," the corporal shouted again, desperation in his voice. "Call it." Time stretched thin, fragile as glass. If she hesitated, men would die. If she fired and she was wrong, she would kill one of her own. Her finger trembled on the trigger. Her scar throbbed beneath her ribs, the metal pressing cold against her skin. She saw the village again, men pinned under rubble, smoke swallowing the sky, her body moving when no one else would. She remembered the weight of choices no one wanted to make. She exhaled. "Left flank," she shouted, voice sharp as steel. "Take him down." The corporal didn't hesitate. Neither did the others. A burst of fire split the air. The lieutenant fell, his body jerking against stone before crumpling into the dust. For a heartbeat, the canyon went still. Then the enemy fire faltered. The coordination broke. Without their inside man, their rhythm shattered. Seized it, barking orders with a voice that felt carved from the same fire that had once nearly consumed her. "Push forward. Break the ridge." The team surged. Bullets carved the air, grenades thundered against stone, shadows fell back into the canyon's far edges. It was brutal, quick, decisive. When the last shots faded, silence returned, broken only by the rasp of lungs and the faint echo of rocks tumbling down. No one moved at first, no one spoke. The corporal stood slowly, chest heaving, rifle still smoking. He glanced at, his eyes heavy but certain. "You were right." The words cut deeper than any bullet, because being right had cost her again. They gathered around the lieutenant's body. His face was slack, eyes open to the sky. In his hand they found the proof, a transmitter, slick with blood, still blinking faintly. A signal device. No one argued. No one doubted now. The betrayal was carved in undeniable light. And yet felt no victory, only the familiar ache, the ache of loss, of choices that left scars no metal could cover. Back on the carrier, the air felt heavier than steel. The men moved in silence, heads bowed, not from shame but from the weight of what they had seen. Betrayal in their ranks, death at their own hands. In the admiral's quarters stood stiff, her uniform dust-stained, her voice hollow as she reported the truth. It was him, the lieutenant. He was the leak. The admiral's eyes closed briefly, a flicker of grief passing across his features. "I suspected." Her jaw tightened. "Why didn't you pull him sooner?" He looked at her steady. "Because I needed proof, and because I needed to see if you would act." Her chest burned. "You put us at risk." He didn't deny it. "I put faith in you, and you carried it." Her fists clenched at her sides. She wanted to hate him for it. But beneath the anger was a sharper truth. He had seen her when she tried to vanish, and he had forced her into the light she had sworn never to stand in again. She turned to leave, but his voice stopped her. "You saved them," he said quietly. Her throat tightened. She didn't turn back. Not all of them. She walked out, the weight of his words chasing her down the corridor. That night she stood alone on deck, the sea black beneath the stars, the metal glinting faintly under the floodlights. She pulled her sleeve back, staring at it. Once she had hated it. Once it had been nothing but a wound carved in silver. But now it was something else. Not pride, not glory, a reminder. Behind her, Boots approached. The corporal stopped at her side, silent for a long moment. "You made the call," he said finally. She nodded. "I'll carry it." He studied her profile, the way her eyes stayed on the horizon. Then he spoke words she didn't expect. "We'll carry it with you." Her breath trembled. For the first time in years she felt the weight of her scars shift. Not gone, never gone, but lighter, because they weren't hers alone anymore. The ocean wind swept across the deck, cool and sharp, carrying away the echoes of gunfire. Lifted her chin, letting it wash over her. She would never be free of the ghosts. She knew that now. But maybe freedom wasn't the point. Maybe the point was to stand with the weight and move anyway. As dawn broke, the horizon burned gold, steel meeting sky in a line of light. touched the metal once more, then let her sleeve fall. Sometimes dignity doesn't speak, it simply acts. And in that silence, Carter finally understood her scars were not shame. They were proof. Proof that she had carried others through fire and proof that she would again. The carrier roared back to life around her. Jets screamed into the sky. Boots pounded across steel. Orders barked. Life moved forward. And moved with it. Not hidden, not silent. Alive.